Right then, hello everybody, and welcome to High Street Regeneration using compulsory purchase in regeneration projects. I think that's the longest title we've ever come up with, and it didn't even fit in the Eventbrite box. So yeah, lesson for the future, shorter titles. I'm Beverly Gormley, and I'm the Heritage Network's Programme Manager. And if you don't know us already, we're the UK's umbrella body for non-profit organisations that are rescuing, restoring, reusing and running older buildings. And until recently, we were known as Heritage Trust Network, and we're currently rebranding to reflect our broadening membership. Over the last 5 years, our High Street Regeneration programme has focused on communities that are reusing historic buildings to benefit their town and city centres. And today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Darren Barker, who's the Managing Director of Great Yarmouth Preservation Trust and a very long-standing member of the network. And I think it might go back to when we were UK Association of Preservation Trusts, maybe. So before I hand over to Darren, I just need to point out that this session is being recorded and everyone who booked a ticket will be sent the link. So don't worry if your connection goes down or the postman knocks or the dog starts barking. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat and feel free to enable closed captions if you need them. There should be a little button at the bottom. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat box during the session and we'll have the opportunity to ask questions at the end. So that's quite enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Darren, and if you have any slight issues with the audio, it's just that Darren's speaking into his mobile phone for you to hear him because the laptop microphone wasn't working. So do let us know if there are any issues, but it should be okay. We've tested it. So enough from me. Over to you, Darren.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me, or can you hear me, Bev?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's still good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thanks. Yes. So thank you for the introduction. I'm Darren, and I'm from Great Yarmouth. And I work as the manager of Great Yarmouth Preservation Trust, and we've been in existence since 1978. So one of the longest running preservation trusts, I think. Sure, this is still working. Yeah, has that gone to the next slide?
Yeah, it's on your compulsory purchase orders one.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about my experience of compulsory purchase orders and working in partnership with local authorities to achieve successful outcomes for vacant and neglected buildings. And perhaps the most crucial element of the entire process is having a strong relationship and cooperation with the local authority. I mean, that's important anyway for all building preservation trusts, I think, but it's particularly important with CPOs because it's only a local authority and Historic England, but for our purposes, it's only a local authority that can use the legislation in place to take forward CPOs. This can often be enabled and supported by building preservation trusts. So it's sort of it can be a really good kind of symbiosis and a way to achieve positive outcomes for dilapidated buildings and the built environment. And this image shows the waterways, which is a 7.5 acre park on the seafront in Great Yarmouth, which the Borough Council and the Preservation Trust worked in partnership to restore from a fairly derelict state back to its original 1927 design. That's a good example of working. It didn't have any CPOs or repairs notices or anything like that in it, but is an example of the positive outcomes that can be achieved by working in partnership. Now, in the case of Great Yarmouth, there's been a partnership in place between the Trust and the Borough Council since the Trust was established in 1979. And this had operated through a service level agreement until 2023. And under the service level agreement, the Trust received officer time. We received capacity in the form of a support such as IT, free IT, legal advice, and that sort of support. And in return for that, we delivered the restoration of and reuse of scores of buildings. But unfortunately, in 2023, the council withdrew from the service level agreement, and instead they opted for a looser, informal statement of intent. And this effectively withdrew office support and a lot of the benefits that we had as an organisation. And the results were a slowing of trust activity and the reduction in the number of projects, and ultimately the number of buildings repaired and brought back into economic use. This was quite well, it's tragic, really, but it does illustrate how important it is to have a strong working relationship, because without it, then the number of buildings being repaired isn't so many. So moving on, the legislation to progress a CPO is contained in the Planning Listed Buildings Conservation Areas Act 1990, and it's relatively straightforward. For the purposes of Building Preservation Trust, it's Section 48 that covers a repairs notice, and Section 47 which covers compulsory purchase order arrangements. The Act enables local authorities to serve repairs notices on owners of listed buildings, specifying the works it considers necessary for proper preservation of the building. I'll explain this in a couple of case studies as I go through this presentation. But essentially, if the repairs are not carried out, the local authority can begin a CPO process. This is the first case study. This is number 160 King Street. And King Street is in one of the most deprived wards in the Eastern region and has a range of issues, including vacant buildings, dereliction, neglect, as well as social and economic issues which affect the care and the maintenance of buildings. And basically, there's no money and there are very low building values. And this is a massive disincentive for the owners to repair or even to maintain their buildings. So, for example, about 7 or 8 years ago, a building of similar size sold at auction for £16,000 in King Street. So it is an indication just of the incredibly low values in this ward. Now, 160 King Street had been vacant and deteriorating for about a decade. The Preservation Trust advised the council of its condition in a report. We'd had our eye on it for a while. We'd been monitoring it. And we set out options and for its reuse and offered to support the council in reaching a successful outcome. The Trust also committed at a very early stage to buying the building should it end up going through a CPO process. Council had an outlet. The Grade 2 listed building had reached that tipping point that we're probably all aware of, where rapid and accelerated deterioration was taking place because of water ingress. There were structural issues, there was vandalism, there was attempted arson as well. So it was in a bit of a pickle, really. And behind the rather nasty later facade was a complete late medieval jetted timber frame. So it was an incredibly rare survival. In terms of the building stock in Great Yarmouth, we don't have, although it is a medieval town, there is not a lot of medieval buildings left. So there was evidence of rough sleepers, and as I say, there was attempted arson, flat ceilings, dry rot, wet rot, and many other decay mechanisms. A typical sort of things that you expect for a building that's been left abandoned for over a decade and with water pouring in. In all cases, going through the going through the process, working in partnership with a local authority, in all cases, the initial step is for the local authority to contact the owner, seeking access in order to assess the condition of the building. Although in this case, the condition was fairly clear from the outside. The local authority has a right to entry under Section 88 of the Act, but with 160 King Street, the building was already vacant and open, so anybody could come and go. So one of the first things that we did was to secure the property. The next stage is to produce a robust schedule of repair, and in many cases, this is the most crucial element in the process. And in my experience, the schedule must be absolutely watertight and specify precisely and in great detail the necessary repairs which are needed to preserve the asset. And it mustn't stray beyond that, otherwise it could face challenge. Now, that's important to bear in mind for later on in this talk. So with the building identified and its condition assessed, warning letters are sent out to the owner by the local authority. The local authority sets out the concerns and the provision under the Act. Now we tend to send out a series of warning letters right from the outset. So we set out the buildings being identified, ask the owner what their intentions are, and so on, before it leads to the warning letter, which sets out the Act. And if no action is taken or there's no response, a second letter is sent together with a copy of the schedule of repairs and a date for serving a repairs notice should no action be taken by the owner. The owner of this particular building had died several years before, and the property had been inherited by a daughter who lived abroad. With every case I've dealt with, it is always better to negotiate repairs or sale rather than to follow a repairs notice and CPO route. And this is because the legislation and the CPO should be the last resort. And although relatively straightforward, it can be time consuming and takes many months to reach a conclusion. And all the while, the building is deteriorating and the costs are increasing, the cost for repair are increasing. So getting that really early dialogue going is pretty key. And then, of course, if no action is taken, or a timetable of repair from the owner isn't agreed, then the repairs notice can be served, and this can be contained in a covering letter detailing the Act and why it's being used. It has to contain a full schedule setting out the repair work needed, a location map, signed by an officer at local authority with the appropriate authority to do so, and it has to be sent to the owner and anyone with a legal interest in the building, and the notice is also pinned to the building as well. With 160 King Street, there was no response and no action by any of the interested parties to resolve the building's condition. There was little interest in it. Clearly, the best option is for the owner to undertake the works and sell the building to a third party, or sell the building to a third party able to carry out the works. But if not, and no action is taken by the owner, and after 2 months from serving the notice, the local authority can begin the CPO proceedings. Many local authorities tend to shy away from repairs notices because the outcome can be a CPO, of course. And without a credible building preservation trust to sell onto, the building simply ends up as another expensive liability for the council. And councils really don't want to add to their portfolio of buildings in poor, well, our one doesn't, to buildings in poor condition. And the other alternative is that the council put it into an auction and somebody else will buy it and may not be equipped with the ability to repair it appropriately. So a local authority is only really going to go through a CPO if they've got a clear route to achieving full repair and reuse of the building. And this does normally involve a CPO. It does normally involve a building preservation trust, certainly with heritage assets and listed buildings. The Secretary of State, through Historic England, has to confirm the CPO and needs to see that reasonable steps have not been taken for the building's proper preservation. Moving on to the CPO itself, the Acquisition of Land Act 1981 and the CPO of Land Regulations in 1994 set out and detail the procedure. But in summary, a notice is served on the owner by the local authority, and the notice is placed within the local newspaper. A statement of reasons for making the CPO is also served upon the owner, and the owner can object once the notice is served within 28 days in writing to a magistrate, providing evidence that preservation is underway. And objections can also be made to the Secretary of State, and a public inquiry will be held if objections are made and not withdrawn. The images on the left show the building during the recording process, so we needed to fully understand every single aspect of the building. So there's lots of components to this, to repairs notices and CPOs and working with heritage assets, and all of it is driven by gaining as much information and knowledge as possible about the particular building. Working in partnership with the local authority, the process can only really be achieved through partnership working, and this requires a joined up and shared approach to protecting the historic built environment. So being entirely aligned, having the local authority on side with the Preservation Trust. And as I said earlier, local authorities require a credible building preservation trust or third party to sell the building onto if the CPO is successful. And this normally requires the building preservation trust to evidence funding, a project plan, a business case for viable end use, and so on, because the last thing we want is for the building to fall back into disrepair without a viable and sustainable use. Building preservation trust should be equipped to carry out much of the work for the local authority in terms of identifying the building, producing the schedule, negotiating with the owner. And it eases the burden for the local authority, who are under a lot of pressure at the moment in terms of capacity and so on, not just here, but I'm sure across the rest of the country. So the more that Building Preservation Trust can do, helping the council, the better it is, because it only reduces the workload for the council, but it de-risks the entire process. And I find most local authorities, but not all, but most are risk adverse. Understandably, if they're playing with the public money, playing with it, they don't play with it, but you know what I mean. As part of the process, the building has to be valued. So once the CPO is served, a valuation is taken place by a district valuer or other qualified valuer. And this sets the amount of compensation which will be paid, subject to a re-evaluation on completion of the CPO. And the value for 160 King Street was £27,000. Now, it will actually have a negative value, obviously, because the amount of work, well, not obviously, but I'll get to why it's got a negative value in a bit. But the valuer will argue that it will be worth something to somebody. If you put it in an auction, somebody would pay something for it. So this is the sum that they came up with. Now, what I meant about it having a negative value, the total project costs for full restoration, repair of the building, bringing it back into use, was £400,000. Now we managed to achieve funding or secure funding from the Architectural Heritage Fund. There was some Townsville money, some of our own money, and a small amount of lottery money as well to get together the funding package. So the repairs were fairly complex, but made they weren't made easy, but it was reasonably painless because we had a good contractor and a good professional team, and we completed the repair element of the project in under a year. We ended up with a 2-bedroom apartment above a ground floor restaurant. The re-evaluation of the building, once the works had been complete, was £110,000. So I mentioned it having a negative value or a conservation deficit. So you have £27,000 as its initial valuation, which is what the paid to the owner or the people with an interest in the building. £400,000 to do the repair work, and it's an end value of only £110,000. So there is a significant deficit there, and that significant conservation deficit is why developers and the market doesn't pick up and intervene to take these buildings on, because it just isn't the profits there, and it's why organisations like building preservation trusts are absolutely crucial, because these buildings would simply be lost, and also funders like the Architectural Heritage Fund, without their support, then many of the buildings in Great Yarmouth would be in a much worse condition. Not just the Architecture, Historic England and the lottery as well played an absolutely crucial role. We achieved full and comprehensive repair of the building after listed building consent and planning permission were obtained, and the applications for consent, planning permission, and LBC were submitted during the 9 months it took for the CPO to complete. So you have to factor in that amount of time, and that's a relatively short one, 9 months. So you've got that time, but that time can be used productively as well. There's a risk involved, of course, because this building's not in your ownership, but you can press ahead with things. So when the CPO is actually confirmed, you can hit the ground running. And these are some rooms of views of the rooms once we've done the repair work. Minimal intervention, the normal things that we all work with: normal intervention, appropriate materials, all that sort of thing. And this was the bedroom that had suffered water ingress and an arson. And this is the swanky new kitchen that serves the restaurant. And the opening event, and we had a minister, culture minister, I can't remember her name now, Caroline Dinage. She came and opened the building for us, which was nice. So it was a good outcome. Overall, was about 11 months to do repair and 9 months to do the CPO, to go through the CPO process. A couple of months before that, going through the repairs notice and so on. But it means the building has been saved and brought back into viable and sustainable end use. The second case study is 145 King Street. And this is a late Victorian former church room. It was built to support the community needs of a nearby chapel. And it was a space for the Sunday school and the boxing club and all that sort of stuff that the working communities that churches used to do. And it's a Grade 2 listed building, and it had been empty for about 8 years. And building control at the local authority considered it to be a dangerous structure. There were falling masonry from high level. And the railings at the front were quite precarious as well. The columns, there were structural issues with the columns, so it was in a bit of a state. And we couldn't contact the owner. We simply could not trace him no matter what we tried to do. I knew who he was from several years before, but all the contacts that we had to try and start some initial conversation, we just couldn't get hold of him. So warning letters were sent to all the interested parties based on the land registry, and to any former addresses that we had and other contacts. And working with the local authority, we used powers to access the building and to survey the building and produce the schedule of works. But this one was a entirely unique case for me. I'm sure there are other buildings like this, but for us it was entirely unique because it had been used by a hoarder for God knows how long. But the building was full of stuff from floor to ceiling, with little passageways and crawl spaces going through it. It's absolutely chock-a-block. And environmental health were very concerned about this for obvious reasons: fire risk and the amount of vermin that were in the building. So we'd found ourselves in a situation with a listed building in a dangerous condition, with no traceable owner, significant structural issues, water ingress. There were regular break-ins, and at the back there had been an attempt at arson, fire risk because of the hoarded items, significant problems with vermin. We produced a schedule which enabled the repairs notice and an urgent works notice to be served. And the urgent works notice is important in this instance because it means you can get on with it quickly. Mailed all the contacts, as I said, and also advertised it in the local press. And even the process continued. We continued the process following all the guidance. We managed to start to work out a project plan to remove the debris and the waste. And days before the contractors were due to start, we were contacted, or I was contacted by the owner, and he was objecting to the notice on the grounds of his protected characteristics as a hoarder. As this created a nervousness with the local authority and Historic England, and it was made far worse because he refused to communicate with anybody other than me, and this resulted in prolonged period of negotiations between me and him with daily phone calls, because he wouldn't meet face to face; he would only do it via phone calls, and incredibly lengthy emails as well, which were pages and pages and pages. And slowly, we finally reached a solution, agreed a solution between him and me. And the owner allowed the Preservation Trust, and only the Preservation Trust, and not the council. He despised local authorities and had a huge mistrust of any authority. And so he allowed the Preservation Trust to carefully sieve through all the items under his supervision, but under his supervision on the phone, because he wouldn't visit the building. And we agreed that we could dispose of all the soiled, infested, ruined items, which filled 24 industrial-sized skips, and the remaining items that he wanted to keep were to be salvaged in a barn that's owned by the Preservation Trust and stored in this barn. And he still intended to make an objection to the CPO, which he did on the day of the deadline. But we got a dialogue going with him, and he was allowing us to go into the building and clear it and really kind of get to understand the building, assess its condition, and so on. But because the owner's protected characteristics as a hoarder, the Secretary of State required extra layers of due diligence, which caused a significant delay in getting any work done. The delay, probably entirely right, because of because of his characteristics, caused us a massive challenge in terms of the funding package, because, you know, as I said earlier, you can't start these processes unless you're sure that you have a project plan, funding in place, and all the rest of it. Because you know, you just can't rely on the fact that something will turn up, because quite often it doesn't. So you have to have that in place. And our funding package was affected by this delay because it in essence, we had funding from combined sources. We had Heritage Action Zone money, which is Historic England area-based grant scheme, and some of our own money. The problem with the HAS money, the Heritage Action Zone, was it was only allocated for one financial year, and it couldn't be rolled over into the next. So we had £400,000 to spend in one financial year, or lose it. And the problem was we only had 8 weeks left until the end of the financial year. So we agreed with the owner, or I agreed with the owner, that he would actually let us carry on working on the building to undertake the emergency repairs while he challenged the CPO while it was being determined. I mean, it was really good of him, actually, because he could have not played ball at all, and the building could have become even worse, and we would have lost the 400 grand. But he allowed us to do it, to carry out the works to the columns and to the roof and so on. But undertaking that amount of work, you know, in an 8-week period was quite a challenge. And then eventually he withdrew his objections to the CPO, and it progressed to completion, just like that. But in this case, the valuer fixed the price at £72,000, and this is higher than 160 King Street. It's a much bigger building. Its condition wasn't as bad, and it's still bad enough to serve repairs notice and for it to be a dangerous structure, but it wasn't as bad as condition as 160 King Street. The cost of the repairs and the clearance that we had undertaken were taken from the value as well. So on completion of the CPO, it was resold by the local authority to the Preservation Trust immediately for £72,000. And as far as I'm aware, the £72,000 still sits in the council's bank account, and the owner has still yet to claim it 3 years later. I think they have to keep it there. I don't know, I'm making it up now, but I guess they have to keep it there forever or for a very long time. I really don't know. Maybe they give it to us, it'd be nice. So we pulled out all the stops to get as much of the spend as we could, and Historic England were brilliant in helping us, allowing us to pre-purchase materials and to get this big spend that we had to get in sort of short space of time, and pre-purchase materials for the next phase, and generally be as flexible as they possibly could with the HAS grant. We undertook all the works and the repairs that were specified in the repairs notice, and in addition, we undertook extra masonry repairs and roof repairs. This is Will, and he worked as a trainee on one of our previous projects. It's another presentation, but we do lots of training of young people, especially those not in education, employment or training. And he worked on one of our projects, and now a qualified bricklayer, and came back to work on this project. So that's kind of like a really nice story there. But as I said, that's another story. Lots of structural repairs. The building's made structurally stable, free from water ingress. And this isn't the best photograph, but the lead work was absolutely beautiful, incredibly good lead work, a high level of craftsmanship, really, really nice. In addition, we repaired a number of the architectural features, including the railings, which had been identified as dangerous, and they were being held together by bits of baling twine and a bike chain, I mean, massively heavy if they'd fallen. We are currently fundraising to secure the last bit of money necessary for the fit out. So the building is now structurally repaired, all the fabric has been repaired, but it needs a fit out. And we're working with an organisation called Pathway, who, that's a local organisation. They provide meals and food for people in need. There's a kind of food bank with meals provided as well. So that's a really good use for the building. It's also worth touching on other ways that we work closely with the local authority, other than CPOs and repairs notice. And we've developed a model where we secure mortgages from the council to purchase vacant and neglected buildings. These are buildings at risk on their at-risk register. The mortgages are only agreed when we can evidence funding is in place for repairs, or a clear strategy for funding in place for repairs, and a sustainable end use and a robust business plan to show that the end use will generate enough revenue to pay the mortgage and to keep the building maintained and operated in the long term. There's a kind of win-win. I mean, we're taking all the risk, of course, but it is sort of win-win situation. These loans are over 20 years, and it's a fixed interest rate over that period. We've used this particular model on 7 buildings. Once we've bought the buildings and undertaken the repairs and brought them back into reuse, we don't sell them. So we have a portfolio, and each building is managed and maintained by us, often leased to third parties as well, but under our overall management. Lots of them are residential as well, and we operate as a landlord and have a waiting list of people. We've also worked with the local authority on a number of asset transfers, especially vacant and neglected towers, which form part of the medieval town wall of Great Yarmouth. There's a 1.2 mile town wall, linear monument, and there are a number of towers, defensive towers along the wall. And we've secured funding and repair them and then adapt them to use as holiday lets, which seem to be quite popular. This is the Northwest Tower. This is the one we recently completed. Again, all those good conservation things, minimal intervention, making sure that the end use is fitted around the building rather than the other way around. This is the third tower that we've completed, so the third one that has been transferred to the Preservation Trust, and it will be open for Easter, ready for people to come and let. So I don't know what the time is because I can't see a clock, but I might have rushed through that too quickly, Bev.
Yeah, that's fine. It's 11:10.
But if there's any questions.
We've got lots so far.
Okay.
Thank you, Darren. I felt like I've watched a film. Like I've been to the cinema and watched a film, because you've taken us through the real highs and lows of the CPO process and the restoration process as well. If I have a look at the notes I've made from the questions in the chat, we've got Georgina from Cornwall Building Preservation Trust. She wants to know if third tier authorities such as town or parish councils can they serve CPOs? Is it just local authorities?
It's local authorities, but the organisations you just mentioned can work with local authorities. If you can start to develop that relationship with local authority, with their conservation officers, their planning team, the elected members, build up that relationship with local authorities, and set out the benefits of that relationship and how working together using repairs notices and urgent works and CPOs can be really effective.
Brilliant. That's really good to know. Shona's asked in the chat, can we possibly go back to the slide on the mortgage model with the local authorities?
Yep.
She has lots of questions. Shona, I don't know if you want to take yourself off mute, unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks so much for the brilliant presentation. So my name's Shona Simpson. I work for Glasgow City Council Planning Service, and I work as the Built Heritage Officer. Primarily, I try to find positive outcomes for buildings at risk in Glasgow. So I work incredibly closely with our local Building Preservation Trust. I don't know, they might be on the call right now. But I just had a couple of questions about that model that you showed regarding the mortgages with the local authority. And I didn't manage to write it all down while you were talking. So I just, wanted to maybe go back to that and maybe ask a wee bit more how that works, if possible.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right. So the first one that we did was in, I think it's 2013. So we identified a building at risk with no potential way of resolving. It had been at risk for years and years and years. So we went to see the chief exec of the borough council. And we'd already had the building valued. We'd also spoken with the owner, who was very keen to sell the building. And we also had a funding package or potential of a funding package in place. So we went to see the chief executive council, and we suggested that the borough council lend us the money, purchase the building. We would then secure funding. In that case, I think it was the lottery money. They had a Townscape Heritage Initiative scheme operating in the area. So we produced a funding package to show the chief exec, and a business plan showing what the building could be used for and how much money that would generate to not only service the loan, the repayments of the loan, but also keep the building maintained and in good condition. And in this case, it was a residential unit above an art gallery, and in a warehouse at the rear, there were a number of artist studios as well. So all that combined generated enough income to not only keep the building maintained, serve loan, but also provide some revenue back to the Preservation Trust to use on other projects. So we set all this out in a paper, and then it went to full council. The chief exec took it to full council to make a decision, and they decided to run with it. And it was kind of like I suppose a test bed to see how it would work, whether it would work. Well, it went really well, and the building was removed and the buildings was registered. The art gallery was really popular, and the revenue was even more than we had predicted in or set out in the business plan. And so on the back of that, we did another 6 using the same process. The mortgages are over 20 years. It's a fixed interest rate, so we know how much we're going to be paying back over the whole 20 years, so we can budget and manage it. But I'm sure other places must do it. It's kind of an obvious way for local authorities to get buildings off of their at-risk register, and essentially to de-risk it for themselves, because they have a charge on it. So if worse comes to the worst, then it's sold and they can claw their money back. It seems like a sort of fairly logical way to go about securing the repair of buildings. Yeah,
and so the mortgage is purely used for the purchase of the building. Is that right?
It is. Right. I mean, we've always been lucky because we have. Because we're an area of high deprivation, but also we've got economic need, but we've also got heritage merit in Great Yarmouth. We've always been quite fortunate in securing external funding. Now, I suppose a local authority might consider loaning the amount of the purchase of the building plus the amount it needs to do to repair. But you know, the maths around that might be a bit more difficult for a local authority to swallow, because especially if you're dealing with conservation deficits.
Yeah.
It might not be so effective because.
Sorry, were all the owners and the ones that used with this model, were they all willing to sell?
We had two where the owners approached us, and one that we'd identified, and the others were CPOs.
Right.
So it was a kind of mixture.
Right, got you. That's fascinating. Yeah, sorry, I'll stop sort of monopolising the questions. Thanks so much. That's really fascinating. Yeah, thanks.
So this building, the building in the image is the Iron Duke, and it's an Art Deco public house. And we bought it from the owner a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, for £110,000. And it is an absolute thorn in the side of a local authority. It has been for a long time. It's prone to vandalism. It's a fabulous building, incredible building, with a really its 20th century history kind of really echoes the history of Great Yarmouth in the 20th century. All the peaks and troughs and all the changes, and the glory days of the 40s and 50s, and then the troughs in the 70s and 80s and so on. So we borrowed £110,000 from a local authority to secure this building, and we didn't have a funding package in place at the time, but we had an agreed expression of interest with the lottery. But the borough council was so keen that something was done about it that they lent us the 110 to buy it. Well, hopefully, if all goes according to plan, we'll actually start doing the repair work on it with lottery funding, if we get the final agreement, in March. So it's taken a while, but the council have had a lot of faith in us. We've got a good track record, and they're keen to get this one done. And it always goes back to having that really good relationship with the local authority and building up the credibility. So the more you do, then the more they trust you to deliver.
Brilliant. Thanks, Darren. I hope that helps. Shona, that was a great question. And Neil from Glasgow Building Preservation Trust is here on the call this morning. Moving on to Bonnie's question, Bonnie Jackson from Harrison Stringfellow, I think. I thought it might be best if you could ask this yourself, because it's quite a long question, and you mentioned community asset transfers. Are you happy to unmute?
Yeah, hi there.
Hi, Bonnie.
You can hear me. Hi. I was just wondering, and you possibly touched on this a little later in the presentation after I'd already put the question in the chat, but I just wondered if there was ever situations where you'd sort of worked with a local authority and sort of identified an end user group or community group for a building to be asset transferred over to after the CPO.
Yeah, what we do is we work with community groups. So Pathways, for example, is one, who are the food bank and meal people. Another organisation we're working with, we're currently restoring a church that was given to us by the Church of England, or sold to us for £1 a few years ago, and we're restoring that. And the end user is another organisation called Original Projects, who's a local charity who works in the art sector. Now with both of those, the deal or the lease, so we'll lease the building onto it, so we will retain the asset, and it's our freehold. But in these two cases, it's not the same for all the others, but these two cases, what we've agreed is a really long lease. So I think one is 20 years and one is 15 years. So the longer their lease, the better for them, because it gives them security, and also it's better for them to fundraise if they need to. And the lease is £1 a year, but they are responsible for it's full repairing lease. They're responsible for all maintenance. They're responsible for insurance, all the utilities. So we own the building as a kind of fallback position, as a safe pair of hands, and all that sort of thing. But the community group has taken on a lease, which is good for them, because it actually, it's £0 or £1, whatever. And we don't have the liability of having to pay the insurance and so on. I mean, other ones like the Iron Duke one, we've got a partner already who are going to have it as a pub and a food offer on one side. So it will stay as a pub, and then the other part will be a food offer. Now they're going to enter into a proper commercial lease with us, because they are a commercial outfit. So it'll be a commercial lease with them. So it's kind of different. So with all of our buildings, and finding those, I think one of the challenges that we face as an organisation is finding those viable and sustainable end uses. There's a big need for housing in Great Yarmouth, but not everything can be converted to housing. We wouldn't want to convert this one, for example, to the residential. We probably wouldn't get listed buildings in, even if we wanted to, which we don't. So it's finding those, spending a lot of time at the beginning, doing the options appraisal and all that sort of thing, and finding the best end use, not just in terms of the commercial viability, but also for the building, because you wouldn't want to do anything that was detrimental to these the listed buildings.
No, that's amazing. That's really interesting to hear about the different sort of arrangements and user groups and pathways to finding those that you've come across. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
You're segueing into a question that Emma posed as well, about end users, and I don't know if you could go into any more detail about how you find the end user. Or do they find you?
Well, it's a kind of a bit of both. If we can legitimately, and by legitimately I mean appropriately, do residential conversion, there is a huge need for residential units in Great Yarmouth. And the units we provide are really good quality, and they are below market rent as well. And we have a waiting list, and we've never had any, touch wood, having said that, we're probably getting loads of terrible tenants now. We've never had any issues at all. People really respect the buildings and their homes. So if we can, we do residential, but it's not always possible, of course, like I just said. Some of the buildings we take on and manage and operate ourselves. So we have a gallery that up until very recently we operated and managed ourselves. But other ones where we need to find a tenant, we might do an open call. So for this building, we put out a public consultation, an open call, seeking end users. But first of all, asking for people to suggest end uses. We got some pretty wacky ones, of course. And then once we'd committed to the particular use we wanted, which was a pub and a food offer, then we went out to the market to invite people to submit some expressions of interest to operate and run it as our commercial partner. With others like the Pathways, who will operate the food bank and the meals, they found us. We'd already been in kind of informal negotiations with another end user as a community space, but that fell through. And then Pathways got in touch with us about the building. So yeah, it's kind of, it's a kind of mixture of ways.
That's really useful for everybody to know. Thank you. Georgina asked something that you mentioned right back at the start was about a schedule of repairs. And Georgina's asked who would prepare and pay for the schedule of repairs. Yeah,
well, we have the in-house ability to do that. So we're fortunate we can do those ourselves. If you have to use an architect or a surveyor to do it, then obviously there's a cost in place. Now, it might be possible to get that funding through the local authority. They might be able to support it. They might have the in-house skills themselves to be able to provide that service. And I think there are, I'd have to look back over the legislation, but I think there may be ways to reclaim that through through a cost or a charge on the owner. So the local authority might be more inclined to support that financially.
Great, thank you. And Claire's asked, presumably the service level agreement you have with the council comes with some funding, and that's why it's been removed, so the local authority can make savings?
It was more of a, I'm not going into too much detail. I'm not going to badmouth the council either, who have been massive supporters of the Preservation Trust, but it was more of a sort of political thing, really. I mean, we're still in a really good, healthy, strong place with local authority. It's just slightly different. So, yeah. But you know, councils are strapped for money, and they're always looking at ways to save money. So maybe that was in the back of their minds as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I've got a few more questions. If anybody's got anything, please feel free to put your hand up or shout out or put it in the chat box. I've got about 4 more here to ask. Neil Hammond has asked, with the local authority mortgages, what sort of interest rates are agreed over 20 years?
It depends on the current rate the council borrows it for. Is it called prudential? The council borrows their rate for? It's whatever the council, they don't add anything onto it. So whatever they're borrowing it for.
Okay.
They're pretty good. The lowest one is about 1.2% or something like that. And
right.
they've crept up over the years, but
wow, that's great. Thank you. I'm just ticking off these questions as I go along. So sorry, I'm looking away.
The Architectural Heritage Fund, of course, also provides loans.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they do them over a long term, but they certainly do short-term loans.
Yeah, and I've heard that they're really easy to apply for as well.
They are, yeah.
Yeah. Right. Claire has gone down the governance route and has asked, what sort of experience or background do your trustees have at Great Yarmouth Preservation Trust?
Yeah, it's kind of mixed, their experience. I think it's probably easier to explain in the articles and memorandums how the mix of trustees is made up. So in the A&Ms, we have 3 members of the local authority, so 3 elected members, and that is cross-party. So it's not 2 heads in power. It is a really good kind of non-political way of doing it. So there's 3 elected members. We then have 3 members from the local archaeological society, and then 3 community members. So people who represent the community. Now we are just going through the process of amending that slightly. And we're adding 2 new community members. So we're going to add 2 new trustees. But because we feel ourselves to be, or not just feel ourselves to be, we are a grassroots organisation who work really closely with the local communities, and it's important that they are represented. So we will have, in the future, we'll have 3 local councillors, 3 archaeological society, and 5 community representatives. And their skills and backgrounds are kind of various. So we have some people that are business background, historians, and it's a good mixture. We are looking for somebody who's got legal skills at the moment, because that would be really helpful. But it's a good mixture.
That's brilliant. Yeah, legal skills. It's a must, isn't it, on a board?
Yeah.
Fabulous. Next question. It's on a similar vein about your staff. What are the sort of, how many staff you've got, and what's the skills profile? How do you undertake these huge projects?
Well, we had a few years ago, before COVID, we had a full team of there's about 6 people working for us. We're down, and 2 of those are funded by the Architectural Heritage Fund as well. But we're down to 2.5 people now, and we just work really hard. That's the answer. But on top of that, we also set up a trading company a number of years ago. So people that have been trained on our projects, young people that have been trained on our projects, will then be employed by the trading company. It's not for profit, and the only shareholder is the Preservation Trust. And there's another 5 people that work for that organisation, and basically they repair the town wall and do some projects in churches and that sort of thing. So they've learned how to do conservation work, like Will, I showed in that slide earlier. They've worked on our training projects and for a number of years, and then if they're good enough, we employ them through the social enterprise company that we have. But in terms of the actual Preservation Trust at the moment, it's 2.5, but we're looking to build back up again. COVID knocked us, and it knocked everybody. But ours was a bit of a kind of, we didn't suffer immediately because we got loads of COVID recovery funding. But then there's a sort of knock-on effect, and lots of our tenants, the commercial tenants, couldn't cope, and they went under, and so it affected us. But we're building back up again now.
That was really great to hear about you training people and being able to keep their skills there within the organisation and on your projects. Do you find that it stops them moving away, especially with young people? I would imagine, Great Yarmouth suffers from...
There's loads and loads of benefits. I mean, it is an unemployment hotspot. And the big challenge that we have is that there's lots of young people who fall between the cracks of not wanting to or not being able to, not academically good enough to go to do A levels after school. There's no apprenticeships. I mean, you keep hearing about apprenticeships. There aren't apprenticeships, and if there are, the process of getting the apprenticeship is bonkers. I mean, there was one for the Broads Authority advertised recently. It was a 3-part interview process where the young person, a 16-year-old, had to do a presentation, and I mean, it's ludicrous, isn't it? I mean, 16. So it's only catering for a particular type of young person who would have the confidence to be able to do that. Plus, there's no buses anyway, so they couldn't get to these places. They can't afford cars. So we've got lots of young people who fall between those kind of those cracks, and we try where we can to target those, and then through the social enterprise company to find them paid work after a few years training with us.
That's really good to hear.
But even if they don't get the job, there are lots of other benefits. They are starting to develop those sort of soft skills about teamwork and getting there on time and leaving on time, and relationships and pride of place and understanding heritage and all of that sort of stuff.
That's great. Something from the staff members of the Heritage Network, something we hear quite a lot from members, say from the side of the fence of the grassroots organisation that's taken on a project. They're really interested in how to work better with their local authorities. And on the other side of the fence, we hear from local authorities that are looking into, working more with the grassroots organisations. And I just wondered what your sort of top tips are for looking at both sides of the fence and how they can work better together. And I know you mentioned about the local authorities looking for credible third parties. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. What your tips are?
Well, you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? I mean, even if you haven't got a track record, I think it's demonstrating that seriousness and commitment as well. And I think the first steps, the best thing to do is to arrange to have a meeting with somebody pretty high up in a local authority, like the chief exec or the leader of the council, or both, and to actually go in with a proper strategy for the meeting, not to have a little sort of, not to be a bit woolly and going there and say, oh, there's some buildings we'd like to repair, but to go into and have, to be able to demonstrate that if you worked with the local authority, you could, by doing X, Y, and Z, reduce the number of buildings at risk. You could get these people into work. You could boost the local economy. All of that kind of stuff that the councils would like. Show that you've got serious funding strategy in place, and because everybody in their right mind would want to see buildings repaired and brought back into use, and particularly historic buildings. And so I don't think you get a lot of opposition. But if you don't have that kind of clear vision and clear strategic approach to how to do it, then local authorities aren't really going to take you seriously. Like I say, everybody wants it done, but you need to be able to demonstrate how you would be able to achieve that. And just kind of building those relationships, particularly with the higher, the senior officers at the council, and especially with the more influential elected members, because there will be. And there's probably one with a portfolio for heritage as well.
Mm. That's great, thank you. I know I used to work for Heritage Lincolnshire, and they had an advisory group that was made up of MPs and local councillors from, I think, the 10 local authorities in Greater Lincolnshire, and they found that immensely helpful. But I don't know if that's something that, every grassroots organisation would do or would want to do.
Yeah.
Shona apologises that she missed the beginning, but she says, does the BPT undertake the survey and prepare the notices on behalf of the local authority for the UWN and LBRN? I'm not sure what those are.
Sorry.
Yeah, we have to. It's the local authority that has the authority, that has the power under legislation to serve it in England. I'm not sure about Scotland, but we kind of do all the donkey work for them. So that's the thing that makes it more palatable for them.
Yeah.
We take a lot of the load off of them to not only identify the buildings, but also doing the schedule and early negotiations with the owner and all that sort of thing. But it's the local authority that's the powers to serve them.
That's great. Shona, what are UWN and LBRN for those that don't know?
Sorry, I was just because I was typing, I was using shorthand. So Darren had mentioned the use of urgent works notices, which is
right.
the statutory power under listed building legislation, and the LBRN is the listed building repairs notice. Again, so those are the two bits of statutory powers that local authorities have through listed building legislation.
That's great. That's good to know. Thank you. Right, we're getting towards the end of the questions. Diana, hi Diana. You've asked, did Darren use a housing association for the residential properties?
We used to, way back, we used to work with housing association, but then we found about 10 years ago, they started to impose really kind of odd things. So they had, well, it was probably directed by the government or some housing department. They had to have, the rooms had to be a certain square meterage. And so that would mean moving a wall in a listed building, or they were proposed to move a wall in a listed building sort of 2 feet in one direction. And it would struggle to get listed building consent, and we work by fitting the end use around the building rather than vice versa. And so we became our own landlords. Actually, it's probably longer than 10 years ago now. So we used to work with housing associations, and then found it kind of slightly limiting because it was with challenges around the listed buildings. And so since that time, we operate as our own landlord. So I think we have 21 or 22 residential units which we let out. So.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I've got to the end of the questions that were on my list. Claudia's just put in the chat. It's quite a long question. So Claudia, I don't know if you want to ask it yourself.
Hi, Darren.
Hello.
Just Upton from the Wiltshire Historic Buildings Trust. Yeah, you mentioned that you're now down to a staff of 2.5, and I just wondered how you structure that staff team, whether you structure it, because obviously you're managing a charity, you're fundraising. You say that you've got surveying skills in-house. You must have project management skills in-house, even though you've got a team of 5 builders. You must be managing them somehow. And then on top of that, you have a property rental portfolio to manage with all the tenant issues associated with that. And then you have your engagement program, presumably, etc., etc. 2.5 people.
Yeah.
Explain.
Well, we're really lucky that the people that we have are phenomenally brilliant and gifted and wonderful. And they work really hard. But with larger projects, so for example, the Iron Duke, which is the one on the screen at the moment, we are able to bring in external project managers and business consultants and so on, because it's part of the eligible costing of the project. So it's part funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. I do wonder how we managed to do so much, to be honest, and especially because 2 of us are approaching retirement age. So our biggest concern is actually succession planning and working out what's going to happen in a couple of years' time, and who's going to take over. But it is, I've really been a bit flippant. It is quite tricky, and we're looking to start to build a team up again, so we can all get a bit of a break.
Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, the funders do have a lot of bang for their buck with Great Yarmouth, don't they? So Neil has asked, with valuation to inform CPO stroke purchase, who do you use for this service? Should it be a chartered surveyor? And if so, what sort of fee should be expected?
Yeah, the district valuer or chartered surveyor, somebody who's got the right experience and qualifications in providing valuations. And I think the last one that we did was about £250, £300, something like that.
That's great. That's good
So
to know.
Not a huge amount.
Yeah, that was surprising, actually. That's great. Well, I've come to the end of the questions. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask anything else or make a comment? David, go for it.
Hi, Darren.
Hello.
I think Bev sort of asked the question that I was going to ask, which was about that partnership with the local authority. But perhaps I'd just like to ask you a bit more about maintaining that. I think it's interesting what you said about establishing that initial credibility and how that happens. I know we have somebody in the event from Historic Coventry Trust, and I was originally on that on the board of that, and I think what was key to that was the credibility of that board and getting sort of local worthies involved in the board, which gave it that credibility. But I think my question is more about how you maintain that partnership. We have had some cases recently, about 3 different cases, which 1 or 2 of which you're probably aware of local authorities withdrawing from partnerships at a relatively early stage. And it's sort of, my question is more, how can we make sure they're resilient, so they don't become a victim of political or officer change, or just the local authority getting impatient?
Yeah, I think the risk is political officer change. But from our point of view, anyway, that was the thing that affected us. I know it's difficult. I'm not entirely sure I've kind of got an answer. mean, I suppose because we've been working with them now for so long, we're in a really good position. So if funding packages come in, well, there are opportunities to bid for money. So, for example, the Towns deal, a few years ago, the Borough Council secured, I can't remember now, 16, 17 million pounds of Towns deal money. But they got us in early on to talk about what heritage projects might be put into that. Now, the thing about that is they weren't they were doing it because they want heritage projects in, but to improve the built environment and restoration and preserve the environment. But they're also doing it because they know that the Preservation Trust has a very good reputation, and by putting us into the mix as well, it supported their application. Certainly around training, so we going to be providing lots in one of the projects. We'll be providing lots of training. We're training about 70 people, and that kind of helps to tip the scale in what the funders, the criteria the funders are looking for a successful application. So yeah, and it is almost impossible to answer that question. How to keep it going.
I think you have answered it. I guess it's about building up that reputation,
and it's also about. I mean, it's difficult if you're new, but it's about delivering. If you deliver, and my previous boss Stephen Earle, who used to run the Preservation Trust about 15 years ago, always used to say, make sure you spend the money, because if you get a grant or funding, I mean, it's important to deliver. If you keep delivering. But it's also important to spend the money it just gives confidence that and then you can build up that relationship and grow that relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip about spending the money. I think often when groups have come from a background of being a voluntary run body, you're just trying to save money all the time, and then you get into a funded situation, you don't realize actually spending the money is an output as well that needs to be ticked off.
Yeah, and even if it's ludicrous, like having to spend £400,000 in 2 months, it's just you just have to play the game, don't you? And I mean, if we hadn't spent it, we could have spent it far more efficiently and effectively if we had longer. But if we hadn't spent it, then that would have affected the next year's grant. So spend the money and deliver, and the more you deliver.
Thanks, Darren. I must say, last Easter I did wander down King Street because we were in the area, and I was impressed with some of the projects. But I can also confirm that Great Yarmouth is one of the most deprived places in England. I was quite shocked in general terms with Great Yarmouth.
Absolutely, King Street. Just quickly, King Street, before we started to concentrate on it, was 70% vacant, and I mean approximately 70% vacancy and 30% occupied. And then we started to concentrate on it, picking up buildings. We own a number of buildings on there now, and for various reasons, I'm not just what we were doing, but as we flipped it, or it flipped to 70% occupied. And then COVID happened, and that is the one street I think in Great Yarmouth that has suffered the most. And so and Brexit as well, because lots of the people who occupied the shops were European migrant workers, and decided to go back after Brexit. And so King Street has really started to go back in the opposite direction again now. I'm waiting to find out what the latest occupation rates are, but I think it's probably getting close to how it was when we started. And I think that shows that, I mean, the pandemic is up. You couldn't have seen that coming. But I think what it shows is that the regeneration of areas isn't a short or medium term thing. It is a really long term thing that needs investment over many years.
Yeah, certainly agree. Thanks, Darren.
Brilliant. Shona's got a hand up.
Yeah, sorry. just one final question on those, on your role with the local authority, excuse me, where you are, trying to prepare those schedules for those statutory notices. I saw in one of the earlier slides that you mentioned a specific bit of legislation that you use for access. I'm presuming that's through listed building legislation, because the sections are different for our legislation in Scotland. It will be a different section of the Act, but we're kind of going through this process at the moment in terms of a planning CPO and trying to get access for various different consultants and other folk. So do you go in with the local authority and use the listed building access?
Yeah, and it's section 88 of the 1990 Act.
For us, we've got a totally different act, so it'll be a different section.
Yeah,
but it's listed building. It's the listed building act. Is that the one?
It's Planning Listed Buildings Act. Yeah.
Yeah, the listed building
Conservation Areas, 1990.
So you're using the listed building access rights. Okay, and so I would imagine you get the local authority to serve that section on the owner if they're unwilling to let you in, and then you go in with the authority.
Indeed, yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's really useful to know.
Great, thank you. And I think this will probably be the last question, but Claire's asked, have you taken on any non-listed heritage assets?
Yes. Yeah, we've got I think it's just one. We've got one non-listed building in the conservation area, and we bought that one with a mortgage as well from the local authority, and it's we let it to a gaming. Now I'm straying well outside anything I know about now. A gaming thing, so they have space in there where people can game and that sort of stuff.
Wow.
Call of Duty. I don't know. Is it Call of Duty?
Oh yeah.
Probably not that, but that's what it's used for. So quite a different end use from our other buildings.
Yeah, that's really good to know. That's it, as long as it works. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Darren. Your ear must be aching so much now from having your phone there. You'll be off to go and lie down in a darkened room, or maybe not, because if there are only two of you, then you've got so much to do.
2.5.
2.5. But that's been an absolute goldmine of tips and advice for everyone this morning. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. I can assure you the slides and the recording, once it's edited, the links will be sent out to you. But do look out for a little feedback form that might have dropped into your inboxes while we've been chatting. It'll come directly from Eventbrite, but if you could fill it in, it's literally 1 minute. It's a very short form, but it just helps us with this programme and to know what to put on for you. So again, thank you everyone, and we hope to see you at the next event.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.